defense policies of a dozen or more nations at the heart of our continent, including Poland. And that is something the UK and our allies could never accept. And it is because of the implications of what is happening in Ukraine, as well as the sheer horror, that the UK has worked side by side with the European Union and the United States to devise the biggest package of sanctions ever imposed on Russia, and one of the biggest packages of sanctions of all times. And I'm grateful to for the determination of President Biden and President Ursula von der Leyen. Our efforts have intensified to the point where the ruble collapsed, or virtually collapsed, yesterday, even though Russia's central bank doubled its interest rate. Now we will do more with our friends to exclude Russian banks from the SWIFT system, freeze their assets, and restrict trade. And we will go further in our efforts to sanction those who are close to the Putin regime. We're now taking further steps to whip aside the veil of anonymity and freeze their assets. But I must emphasize that we are not motivated by any hostility towards Russia or the Russians, quite the reverse. All our hearts ache for the Russian soldiers sent to die in this futile venture. We all grieve with their parents. Only a few weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I visited St. Sophia's Cathedral in Kyiv, which has survived every invader since Yaroslav the Wise built its granite walls nearly 1,000 years ago. It's modeled on Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, which was then the capital of Christendom. How tragic, how incredible, how inexplicable that the cradle of Slavic civilization and Eastern Orthodoxy should now be within the range of Russian guns. As I speak, a column of tanks and armored vehicles, 25 miles long, is grinding south towards the golden domes of this ancient European capital, a city of nearly 3 million innocent people who have done nothing to deserve the carnage that Putin is unleashing in their country. No wonder the Kremlin-controlled media refuses to tell the Russian people that their soldiers are attacking Kyiv. No wonder they spin a tissue of lies and claim that Russia is merely conducting a special operation in the Donbass. Russia is a great country and civilization, and we will never forget her sacrifice in the struggle against fascism side by side with ourselves. We must emphasize every day that it is Putin's regime which is exacting from its own people an unacceptable cost for an unnecessary war, a war of choice that should end as soon as possible. And to ensure that Putin's venture in Ukraine fails, we must get over that key point, that this is not Russia's war, not the Russian people's war. This is Putin's war. And that's been increasingly obvious from everything that he has said and written in the last year. The UK, our government, first considered sending weapons to our Ukrainian friends because we read Putin's semi-mystical essay on the future of Ukraine, amounting to a manifesto for imperial expansion. That's why in January we sent 2,000 anti-tank missiles. Now, more than 25 nations are prepared to send defensive lethal aid in support of the principle of a country's right to protect itself. And I thank Chancellor Scholz of Germany for his speech, which I believe was of world historical significance. We should recognize the gravity of Germany's latest decisions, which have arisen from Putin's aggression. When I spoke to President Biden and fellow leaders last night, we focused on the humanitarian emergency that is now beginning. Putin's invasion has already forced hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes, and we must prepare for an even larger outflow, perhaps numbered in the millions. Putin has already welcomed many thousands of refugees Poland has already welcomed many thousands of refugees with compassion and practical help. And the UK will provide up to £220 million of emergency and humanitarian aid for Ukraine. And I've placed 1,000 troops on standby to help the humanitarian response in neighbouring countries, including in Poland. Many people in Britain will, of course, want to help Ukrainian refugees. So we will make it easier for Ukrainians already living in the UK to bring their relatives to our country. And though the numbers are hard to calculate, they could be more than 200,000. And if the worst happens, and President Zelensky's government is no longer able to function in Kyiv, we must prepare to support them whatever happens in the weeks ahead. And we should recognize that this crisis will impose costs on ourselves and on our electorates, that sanctions have consequences for us as well as for Russia. And no step is free from risk. And whatever the difficulties ahead, and they may be considerable, this is now the moment for Europe to do something that is long overdue, and that is finally to wean ourselves off dependence on Russian oil and gas, and in the long term, reduce our reliance on fossil fuels from any source at all. All of us must proceed with wisdom and care and moderation. We have a duty to ensure that this crisis does not spread any further. But if we are to have any chance of ending this nightmare, then Putin must understand that his savagery will be met with unrelenting economic pressure, and that the West will be united in supporting Ukraine, and that we are ready for a prolonged crisis. I have no doubt that if the West can maintain the extraordinary unity that we have shown so far, if we can press ahead with the strategy we have set out of international, economic, humanitarian and diplomatic assistance to Ukraine, along with defensive weapons, then Putin's venture will ultimately fail. The path ahead will require patience and resolve, and we must be rational in our response and recognize that Russia is capable both of misunderstanding and misrepresenting what we say. And yet I will not waver in my conviction that however long it takes, a sovereign and independent Ukraine will emerge once again. Because Putin has stubbed his toe and tripped on a giant and immovable fact, which is no matter how many troops and tanks he sends, the Ukrainians desire to live in a free and independent country, which is something I think Poles will immediately understand. And in this desire, the UK will always give them our wholehearted support. And in the face of that fact, the unquenchable and manifest will of the Ukrainians to resist, and in the face of this gathering tragedy, I say to Vladimir Putin and his regime, there is only one way out of this morass, and that is to stop the tanks, to turn back the tanks on their way to Kyiv, turn them round and take the path to peace. Thank you all very much.